It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks for joining us. Our guest, Steve Bradford, member of the California State Assembly. He is also the chair of the Assembly's Utility and Commerce Committee, which does what exactly?
We oversee all utility functions in the state of California, your public-owned utilities, your investor-owned utilities, railroad crossings, all those public safety issues.
And the executive branch also has a commission that's called the Public Utilities Commission.
Yes.
What do they do?
They regulate and oversee utility operations. They're the regulatory body appointed by the governor, a 5-member commission comprised of a president and 4 members that oversee all the activity.
And I think it's fair to say that over the last decade or so, they faced some challenges. We, of course, remember the electricity crisis of the early 2000s, and some would argue that the PUC was not mining the store appropriately. Is that a fair recitation of the facts?
Not as much on the energy crisis, but going forward on some of the balancing accounts that we have just recently audited through the Department of Finance. We're finding out.
Well, let's talk about that, because you are the chief watchdog as it relates to the PUC, and you have had some serious concerns about how the PUC is mining its fiscal store.
Yes.
We know the Parks Department has gotten itself in trouble. CAL FIRE has gotten itself in trouble. Is the PUC now along those lines?
Well, we had a hearing last week, and it was troubling, some of the information that we found, and we asked some very poignant questions to the executive director, and he admitted that yes, they have not been the best watchers of the public money as it relates to balancing accounts, and those are special funds that ratepayers provide money monthly on your bill to pay for stuff like deaf and disabled services, Lifeline.
Sir, what you're telling us is so very frustrating to Californians. And sadly, it plays right into the narrative that we hear that government is inefficient, that government doesn't know how to police itself. And the beat just keeps going on and on and on. When are we going to see these, and I don't want to use this term pejoratively, these bureaucrats get a handle on their jobs?
I think you're going to see a closer watch by the legislative body, especially now with a legislative body that's going to be there a little longer, so they're going to be able to mine the store a little bit longer.
Thanks to term limits.
Exactly. Prior to that,
extended.
it was everybody was just moving in and out, that you really couldn't concentrate on something. I think this next class will have opportunity to really drill down on some of the challenges, not only in PUC but other governmental agencies as well.
Let's talk about the PUC specifically, though. What you uncovered was that they weren't mining their books properly. Now what? I mean, so often in Los Angeles, for example, there's a controller, an elected controller. Currently, she's Wendy Gruhl. She'll do this wonderful audit, and then she passes it to the city council, and something may or may not happen because she has no authority to demand that something happens. What happens with these audits? Can you demand action?
Yes, we should take legislative action to make some of those corrective measures that were identified in the audit. I have a bill that's going to now require them to provide a database of these accounts and making sure that this information is brought to the legislative body on a regular basis.
Well, here's a challenge. I mean, the PUC's an executive body, and, not specific to Governor Brown, but one could argue that an executive wouldn't want a co-equal branch to be messing in its Kool-Aid. So, are you convinced that this particular executive would be interested in having a bill like that go through?
Let's hope. I mean, it's for the best betterment of California. It's for the betterment of that agency, and I think it's our responsibility as legislators to oversight.
When we continue, I want to talk more about energy efficiency and clean energy and how the PUC is looking at that. For our guests on HLN, thanks for joining us. For our other guests, we'll be right back. So, Assemblymember, California prides itself in being part of programs that look towards energy efficiency, clean energy. Presumably, the PUC is the agency that's supposed to lead the charge on those initiatives.
Yes.
Your audits are finding some concerns. Yeah. Talk to us specifically about the energy efficiency question, the clean energy question, and how they're using different languages.
We've spent over the last 10, 15 years, $15 billion on energy efficiency programs here in the state of California. We're leading the nation in that. But we want to make sure that we're really getting the best bang for our bucks, that ratepayers are really getting what they're paying for. We've heard a whole lot of stories about the savings that we've had, but we haven't been able to quantify those and qualify those. That's what we really want to do going forward, is making sure that we have measurable goals and that we can clearly identify those savings versus just spewing out numbers and we have no data to back that up.
So I think about some of the clean energy initiatives Californians have passed in the past decade or so. AB 32 deals with greenhouse gases. Prop 39 recently passed that dealt with funding some clean energy programs in schools. Are these programs effective? Are they being run efficiently? Is that what the PUC is supposed to be policing?
Yes, exactly. And that lends itself to another question of, are those numbers that we're getting accurate as to the successes that we're hearing about? Yes, we've had energy savings here in the state of California, but again, we want to get down to the bottom line of making sure ratepayers are seeing direct benefits, that we can put boots on the ground and do some energy efficiency programs.
And I want to push you a bit on AB 32, because the fact of the matter is, the greenhouse gas initiative, no doubt one of the most revered and reviled initiatives in the state of California. And so a lot of microscopes really looking at AB 32 and whether it's being operated. And we've just started, am I right?
Yes.
I mean, we're just, so who's minding the store on that one? I mean, is it the legislature? Is it the PUC? Is it the governor's office?
It's all of the above. I mean, we all have to make sure that AB 32 works. You just started to cap and trade auction
Right.
in November. They just hit the second wave a couple of weeks ago. And we just want, again, we don't want people to continue to put money in a hole and not see any direct benefits from it. So as you said, Prop 39 just passed. That's $500 million a year that we're going to be collecting for energy efficiency programs. We want to make sure it gets down to the end user.
So what's going to happen, for example, on Prop 39? I know that there have been various hearings around the state. I'm not sure if you've been a part of those hearings on how best to spend that money. I mean, look, the voters were very generous, sir, in November. They passed Prop 30. Increasing sales tax on themselves, increasing income tax on the highest earners. They passed Prop 39, closing some corporate loopholes that maybe should have been closed. But again, they were generous. But if this isn't done correctly, it's over. I mean, look what happened in Los Angeles recently. A sales tax failed. The same city that passed Prop 30 by 60% of the vote.
Yeah.
So, you're the watchdog on these issues. What can we do to make sure that the voters' trust is earned?
Again, we have to have transparency, and we had a hearing last week dealing with just that issue, making sure there's transparency, making sure that
this is the PUC. I mean, between us friends, come on. I mean, I don't want to take a position per se, but they're on, in their ivory tower.
There needs to be some fixes there.
Yes.
I mean, I have to admit, it's a large agency that's been around for almost 100 years,
Right.
and there needs to be some reforms there, even in their rate-making processes. Again, we have to make sure that ratepayers
And
are
think
getting-
about, I keep bringing up Los Angeles. I know you represent parts of Los Angeles, the DWP, I mean, which is the LA public-owned utility. I mean, they've had their own, quote, lack of transparency challenges. And so, again, right into the narrative. It just plays right into the story that these public utilities just, they're immune. They're immune, they're on high, and
Well, the
back
public
off.
utilities don't report to the PUC.
I understand.
They have the oversight by the council, but I know the whole attitude.
It's the whole attitude of, back off, we know what we're doing best.
Exactly.
But it's going to change?
We have to make a change. I mean, in order to have the confidence of Californians, we have to make sure that
And
these
you
governments...
feel as if that you have the support amongst your colleagues to see that change through.
Yes, I do. And I think after some of this information has come forth lately, our eyes are open, and we're watching this very closely.
Well,
making
get
sure we get it
cracking,
right.
Steve Bradford. Get cracking. His name is Steve Bradford. He is a member of the California State Assembly, chair of the Utilities and Commerce Committee. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition. Welcome back. It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are now joined by Tom Berryhill. He's a member of the California State Senate representing, we're not really sure because of redistricting. You have your old district lines. In 2014, you'll be running in new district lines. The problem is there are areas around your current old district that are unrepresented.
Yes.
So how is this working out?
Yeah, that is typical in redistricting. There's always a few Senate districts that go unrepresented. And so what we did, we sat down bipartisan, figured out who would be representing what in 14, and we were able to adopt those orphaned counties.
Right. And Mimi Walters I had spoken with from Orange County, she similarly needed to pick up some orphan areas. So you're not the only member that's dealing with this situation.
Very common.
But what's interesting, Senator, is you now represent a massive district geographically. I mean, I can't even name all the counties.
Yeah, it's
From top to bottom, what is it?
all are part of 12 counties, clear from Inyo, which is clear to San Bernardino,
Right.
The Death Valley, clear in, believe it or not, to Rancho Cordova, a little bit of Elk Grove,
Near Sacramento.
near Sacramento, and then we go up. We have all the timber counties: Calaveras, Tuolumne, East Madera,
So
Mono.
these are beautiful counties, no doubt. And so you clearly are someone who is keen to the desire of Californians to keep our environment beautiful and clean and pristine. The challenge, though, Mr. Berryhill, is that sometimes there are unintended consequences of certain environmental regulations. And I'm not speaking as a Democrat or a Republican, because both parties are saying the exact same thing as it relates to a law that was passed in 1970, is it? Called the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. Talk to us about your concerns relating to CEQA.
Well, the problems with CEQA is not that it's a bad law, because it isn't. We all want to have a clean environment. The problems with CEQA is that it's been used by both unions and developers alike to hold up projects.
It's literally been used, and I'm speaking not as a partisan, but again as someone who's just reads and knows a little bit about a lot of it, and it's used as a weapon. I mean, CEQA is used as a litigation weapon.
Absolutely, and so what I have done, I have introduced SB 787. It's a version of Michael Rubio's bill of last year that, coincidentally enough, you know, as a member of the GOP 5, Governor Brown is very aware of CEQA. He wants to see CEQA reform.
Well, I'm sure you know that there was some CEQA reform specific to Farmers Field in Los Angeles passed last year, very specific. And at the signing ceremony, Governor Brown specifically said, there are too many damn regulations. And that's Governor Brown. And so you got a Democrat saying there are too many damn regulations. That says a lot.
Yeah, you know, the governor was very frustrated with CEQA when he was mayor of Oakland because he couldn't build anything.
Right.
You know, it's funny, in this legislature, when they want to build a $1 billion stadium, they waive all CEQA.
But what about
but when the small
$1 million
business, small business person wants to open this thing up, he's subject to extortion from either developers or unions that want to see prevailing wage or higher wages or whatever they want. And it's become a real problem. My bill, 787, is not an end run to CEQA. We've embraced CEQA. We think it's a good thing, but we want to streamline it. And you know, there's been 120 federal and state environmental laws passed since CEQA was passed.
Right.
So we feel if a small businessman can meet all those requirements, that we should go ahead and not hold this thing up in court and let them build.
I want to continue this conversation when we come back. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back on California Edition. Now, sir, you mentioned Senator Rubio, Michael Rubio.
Yeah.
He was seen as the champion of CEQA reform, a Democrat in the state Senate from the Central Valley. He has left the Senate. And so there has been a lot of concern that without Mr. Rubio there as the champion of CEQA reform, that there could be a serious risk that it will stall. Do you follow that line of thinking?
Well, you know, he's been replaced with Jerry Hill.
Right.
And I've worked closely with Jerry. He's a very thoughtful guy. And along with Darrell Steinberg has mentioned that it needs to be streamlined. The governor has mentioned. And I'm looking forward to working with that committee. and seeing if we can't spit something out at the end of this session that actually makes some sense for the working folks.
And so where do we go from here? Because there is this sense of bipartisan pressure on the question of CEQA. I'm amazed at how many people I talk to, Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, that talk about CEQA reform. This is no longer just a Republican mantra. This is a bipartisan mantra. But, you know, bills can get bollocksed up, interests can get involved. Is there enough momentum on CEQA that we will actually see some bona fide reforms, not reforms at the margins, but bona fide reforms? We thought we'd see some through the high-speed rail. Forget what you think about high-speed rail.
Yeah.
We thought we'd see it with high-speed rail. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
If we couldn't get it through high-speed rail, how are we going to get it today?
Well, the short answer to that is, I hope so. And again, working through the chairman, Jerry Hill, working with President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, who has mentioned that we've got to fix this thing. We're going to take a look. There's intent language that the President Pro Tem has right now, so we haven't seen all the details yet. But good policy is good policy, and will we miss Michael? Absolutely, because he had a complete handle on this issue. But when we saw it, I talked to Michael just a couple days before he resigned. And when I heard that he wasn't going to be running this bill, we decided to go ahead and move forward with it and try to get people working again.
So what about the assembly side? Because obviously it needs to be dual track. Do we have a co-sponsor? Do we have a similar bill running through that House?
We don't have a similar bill right now, but as this thing progresses, and it's very early, we hope to gain some momentum and some co-authors over on that assembly side. First things first, though, we have to get it through the Senate.
And what about the governor? He has spoken as if he wants to see CEQA reform. But, you know, in the final analysis, I've always been amazed, sir, about how the administration so often is not brought in early on. They're kind of, it's a different branch of government. And, you know, you can present this very well-negotiated bill, and then the governor sees something vetoed, and we don't see veto overrides.
Yeah,
and so
the GOP 5, this was one of their 3 reforms that they really pushed. And it was the easiest negotiated part of the whole package. Because the governor knew everything about CEQA, and he didn't like anything about it. Not that he doesn't like CEQA in and of itself, but he hated the fact that everything got hung up for the littlest reason.
But let me ask you, I mean, it's a bit inside baseball, but I think it's fair to say the governor was a little angry at the GOP 5 in the final analysis because he had hoped that the GOP 5 would help him with what became Prop 30, with pension reform, and it didn't happen. And so are you still in his good graces? I mean, look, he's a big boy, but be that as it may.
You know, you got to understand the GOP 5 was the first time any of us had gone through that process, and it was a very interesting learning curve.
I can only imagine.
And you know, behind those closed doors with the staff and everybody that's there, we worked very hard on pensions, on a spending cap, and of course on CEQA reform. And it was interesting because once we finally hit critical mass, everybody was working as a team.
We were there, I thought.
And, well, we had an agreement with the governor. It wasn't the governor that said no. It was special interests. When we brought him in, I know he fought for us, and he couldn't come up with the votes.
So can he come up with the votes now on the CEQA side?
We'll see how.
Or whoever he is. I don't, the metaphoric he.
The governor understands. I had a talk with him just last week, and he understands that this is a very tough issue because developers use it against each other.
Right. It's not just progressive interest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, but having said that, as far as where I'm coming from, I think that that's wrong too. And I think that anybody that jumps through all these hoops, goes through all the environmental review, once they do their due diligence, I think they have a right to put Californians back to work again.
His name is Tom Berryhill, member of the California State Senate. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Debbie Arnold. She's a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo County. She'll be talking about CEQA reform as well. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition. This is Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Debbie Arnold, member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo County. And man, we've been speaking for a while about regulation and regulatory reform. We've seen surveys that indicate that California's rankings amongst the business community very low. Cost of doing business 48th, business friendliness 43rd. You've been talking about that for years.
Yes, that was actually part of the platform I ran on when I was running for this position as supervisor. But it is true, and I think we're feeling it more with this economic downturn. The cost of regulation, the uncertainty for business, and it's really becoming expensive.
And let's talk about what a county can do about regulation as opposed to a city or the state, because there are many different layers.
Absolutely.
So what can you do at the county, which is, a pretty powerful body?
Right. Well, the county itself, the county has, especially with land use issues, can make it harder or easier for businesses to come in and be able to build the infrastructure they need to go into business. But something that's come up in the last 2 weeks at our Board of Supervisors meetings and some of the other boards I sit on has been, this is the time of the year when many bodies set a legislative platform. And having worked for the state senator, I'm always very sensitive to the legislative platform because our office was on the receiving end of those.
Of course.
Many boards create them, and basically it's used to kind of direct in-house, but also to lobby in Sacramento and at the federal level for what you think you need for your...
It's the manifesto for the county.
Absolutely. So talking about that, the regulatory reform, I've been very sensitive to that. In fact, to the point that I argued against lowering the tax threshold or raising fees on the voters.
Let's talk about tax threshold because that has become a very significant issue in Sacramento and throughout the state. As you know, Proposition 13 requires that to pass a tax, you need a 2/3 majority. Now, there have been some revisions as it relates to school bonds, but now there are discussions about whether that provision should change, be it for school budgets generally, be it for taxes generally, dropping the threshold to maybe 55%. What's your sense about those calls?
I've actually opposed that and asked it to be pulled from the County Board of, in other words, so that San Luis Obispo County's message to Sacramento is not to promote that sort of thing. And I have two reasons. And first, we touched on regulatory reform, but I think that that will help a lot of our public projects become more affordable.
What do you say, though? Because intuitively, if you think about it, we're a democracy. In democracies, majority rules, 50% plus one.
Right.
Yet for taxes, what we're saying is, no, we need 2/3.
Right.
So it's kind of the tyranny of the minority. I'm just playing it out for you.
And that's right. But the 2/3 vote for taxes has been in the California Constitution since the 1800s. And when you think about it, it was really... the idea was to ensure that the people paying the taxes had a voice. So it's the people paying the taxes. Now, we have taxes that are raised for all different kinds of things. And of course, we pay taxes in society, we pay taxes for schools even though we don't have school children. We pay taxes for roads even when we ride our bike.
Right.
And we pay property taxes, whether we own or people that own property pay property taxes for things that they may or may not use.
Right.
But to ensure that the folks paying the taxes are actually have a strong voice in where this money is going.
Well, let's do this. When we come back, I want to speak more with you about the notion of tax reform. Also, I want to speak about CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, a big source of contention now in Sacramento. For our guests on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other guests, we'll be right back with Debbie Arnold on California Edition. So, Supervisor, CEQA has been a hue and cry for many years, since it passed in the 1970s. Even Democratic Governor Brown has said it's the Lord's work to reform CEQA. That's quite a statement. Do you believe him?
Well, I do, because right now he's promoting projects that he's seen he cannot accomplish without a CEQA reform. The high-speed rail being one.
Right.
There were some projects, infill housing in Oakland, his hometown, and I think that's what clearly CEQA's evolved into something that makes it so expensive and so time-consuming to get projects
And what
passed.
he has said, and what others have said, is CEQA has become less about protecting the environment and more about using litigation as a weapon.
It's a cottage industry now, and it's any projects that go forward. When you're hit with the lawsuits, it's very expensive.
But how do we, and I ask you specifically because you are a supervisor in one of the most beautiful counties
Absolutely.
in the state,
how do we
on the
protect?
coast. Yeah, how do we balance? Because look, I don't care what party you're from, we are Californians and we all value our coasts, our mountains, San Luis Obispo. So talk to me about that balance that you surely day in and day out try to strike.
Absolutely, and I think that's where that's why I advocate again for local control, so the people are close to the people, the citizens
Right.
are close to the people they elect and can be sure that their voice is being heard. This county, we're lucky, and we've recognized, I think, as a county, we've recognized the beauty and we've appreciated it enough to conserve an awful lot of our county. And I've said before, probably on this show, that somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of our county is already locked down, cannot be developed, whether it's the BLM, our
Right.
national monument. We have a lot of forests here. We have a lot of state parks. We have almost 800,000, almost half of our county is under Williamson Act contract, our privately held property, but I call them mini conservation easements, but
That's okay.
conserved and used for agricultural production. So
But
a lot of open space.
To play a little bit of inside baseball, though, as you know, a senator who represented an area not far from here, Michael Rubio, stepped down. And he had been seen as a champion of CEQA reform, a Democrat himself. And there are concerns that with his departure from the California State Senate, he went to Chevron, arguably of all places,
yeah.
that we may not see CEQA reform in a strong sense, that the reforms will not be as dramatic as both some Democrats and some Republicans would like. What do you see?
It sounds like at least the debate and the discussion is going on, and that's a good, healthy thing. We'll start to see it, I think, from the governor's office. We're
Right.
seeing, like I say, when it's costing the taxpayers too much and they can't achieve infrastructure improvements and so forth. It's time that maybe people
You know,
look and
it's
think
interesting.
about it.
We've spoken about this before. When you look at the surveys about California business friendliness, if you really dig deep into the surveys, what we are seeing is on the taxing side, we're probably in the middle. You know, we're not Vermont, we're not New York, we're not New Jersey in terms of these inflatedly high tax states. I'm not saying that we're perfect, but on regulation, survey after survey after survey says we are over-regulated.
Tough.
You know, and I'm not taking a position. I'm just talking what the surveys are saying. And your family owns a farm.
Farm, correct.
And so you kind of are living both as a businesswoman yourself and someone who works in agriculture. You see it.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's just the agricultural industry, but it's private business. Many private businesses and we're seeing the regulation costs. I mean, for the most part, not so much with farming commodities because we don't set our own prices, but other things that you're buying and services that you get, the consumer's paying for these.
And you had mentioned to me you ran for office recently, and what were your voters saying to you?
Voters, I have a conservative part of the county is my district, but they're frustrated with the regulation. They're frustrated with the taxation when nothing really seems to change.
And these were volunteered comments. It wasn't
Correct.
as if you were egging them
Correct.
on.
But I think our government at all levels has become so complex that our voters, they don't know quite what to do about it, but it's
what's
frustrating
interesting
to
is,
them.
yes, you may represent a more conservative part of San Luis Obispo County, but we're hearing this from,
Everywhere.
quote, liberals, progressives.
Everywhere.
We're really hearing it everywhere, as if there's kind of a consensus emerging that we want to protect our coast, we want to protect our mountains, but something needs to break.
This night the pendulum swung.
Right.
And you know, one thing I want to say in this kind of the regulation and the taxation, but especially the taxation, I would like to see regulatory reform, and I
Right.
think that our money will go a lot further because the projects that we want to see done can be done
In a more efficient.
in a much more efficient and costly manner.
Debbie Arnold, you're a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.